They say a kid died out there, I tell them. They ooh and ah and dare each other to go, playfully poking each other in the ribs just like they always do. We stand at the edge of the field, a safe distance from the shack. It's a strange little structure surrounded by a cluster of thick trees in an otherwise empty meadow, like a dark oasis in a desert of tall yellow grass. The shack is tiny, far too small for someone to live inside, at least not comfortably. Its windows are boarded up with plywood panels, and someone had long ago spray-painted Zach's first birthday on the rotting walls. The kids always ask what that means, and I just tell them, I don't know. So what happened to the kid? They ask. How did he die? Was he murdered? A wild animal, a serial killer? They always want to hear the story. I stay silent for a bit and let them wonder. It doesn't matter what the story is. Not really. They just want to be dark and messy, and they always do. If I told them it was an accident or some family dog that went rabid, the whole thing would lose its magic. They needed it to be a horror story. They want someone ripped to shreds by a faithless stranger who lures kids to creepy shacks with promises of candy and video games. They want fanged demons that drag kids to the grave and ghosts that can't, well, turn their hearts into ice just by looking into their eyes. They want blood and nightmares, and that's what I give them. They looked up to me because, well, I'm older. Usually by a year or two. They trust that I know what I'm talking about. I don't know why. They seem to believe that once you get to 6th grade, you learn all of your town's dark secrets. Like there's some kind of ancient book of local lore that's passed down to those who are old enough and wise enough to attend middle school. I let them believe it. It makes the stories better. They stare at me, wide-eyed and excited, waiting for me to spill the gory details. This is my favorite part, the suspense. I make them wait as long as I can until they're practically drooling with anticipation. And then I begin. About 10 years ago, there was this 5th grader named Zach, I say. Sometimes it's Mary, sometimes Sammy, sometimes I tell them no one remembers the kid's name. It doesn't matter. It only matters that they died and right over there in that shack in this field in our town, and they were your age. He could have been your friend. If you were around back then, he could have been you. Zach was a popular kid. Everyone thought he was a real tough guy. He wasn't afraid of anything. The kids nod and shrug and mutter something about how that makes sense. They see themselves as Zach. They're brave. They're cool. Right? Of course they are. One day, Zach got into an argument with another kid during recess. The other kid said Zach was faking it, that he wasn't really that tough. In fact, the kid said Zach was a coward, a chicken. He wanted Zach to prove just how brave he really was. He said, "If you're really as tough as you say you are, I dare you to stay a night in that shack." The kids look at each other, silently asking themselves if they would be so brave to stake that type of dare. It's always the same. Of course I'd do it later, I say. Wouldn't you? So, Zach accepted the dare, I say. And that night, he put a pillow and a flashlight in his backpack, snuck out of his house, and went down to the shack. Back then, the windows weren't boarded up, so it was easy to climb inside. By now, I have their complete attention. They hang on every word. They're already making up stories in their heads about the horrors Zach must have found in that shack. Their stories are worse than anything I could make up. The first few hours were easy. Zach played cards with himself and just waited it out. Soon, it'd be time for sleep. And that would be that. He couldn't wait to rub it into the kids' face at school the next day. His friends would call him a hero. He'd forever be the boy who wasn't afraid of anything, especially some stupid shack. He'd be the most popular kid in school. then he heard something on the wall. A long, slow screech coming from right outside. Then again and again, faster each time. There's no way anyone could possibly know this. It's so obvious that I'm making it up. They just have to think about it just for a second to figure this out. But the kids are on the edge of their seats. They can't wait to hear what happens next. They believe every word. They always do. Zach was getting scared. He'd never admitted it to anyone, even himself, but he was terrified. The scratching got louder and faster, and he didn't think he could take it anymore. And then it stopped. I love this part. I can see the disappointment in their eyes. They feel they've been robbed. They want the monster or a ghost or a demon to tear through the walls and eat Zach whole. But I make them wait. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. All he could hear was the whistling of the wind and the sound of his own breath. I pause and breathe heavily for effect. It works every time. Then suddenly, a deep, raspy voice whispered into Zach's ear. "I'm so hungry." Zach was too scared to move. He couldn't even scream. "I'm so hungry," the voice said again. "And you have so much skin." The kids are silent. I watch their eyes and try to imagine what they're picturing in their heads. What does their evil skin-eating beast look like? I hope it's absolutely terrifying. I hope they're having nightmares every night until they finally die of old age. I hope they never sleep again. No one knows exactly what happened after that, I say. And with this, the kids look relieved. They don't need the details. They already wrote the rest of the story for themselves. And it's a good one. Better and scarier than anything I could have come up with. They make it too easy. The next day, the police found his body lying in front of the shack. His skin was completely gone, ripped from the bone and nowhere to be found. No one could have figured out what had happened that night. The only clue was a single word scrawled in Zach's blood on the wall of the shack. Eat. I watched them shiver. It's wonderful. I could have used any word. Bones, die, kill, dead, whatever. It would have all had the same effect. The kids look at each other, silently competing over who's the least scared. This is the part where I stare at the shack. And I sigh. I let them listen to the sound of the whistling wind and their own breath. And then it happens. It always does. "Well, I'm not scared," says one of the kids. "Me neither. I'm totally would spend the night in that shack," says another. "I dare you," says a third. And so on. I let them talk it out and stare off into the field, watching the tall yellow grass blow in the wind. It's always the same. All but one will back down. The tough guy, the kid who wants to be a hero. He'll take the challenge. After all, he's not scared of anything. And then, just like always, I tell the tough guy how brave he must be. I tell him I wish I were even half as brave as he is. I say I've got to be home for dinner, and I walk away with my hands in my pockets, listening to them excitedly discuss tonight's big plan. When I get home, I lay in bed and try to imagine what horrors they must think wait for them in the shack. Scratching at the plywood walls and starving for the skin of children. I fall asleep and I don't dream. My mom wakes me up in the morning with a kiss on the forehead, just like she always does. I go downstairs and sit down for breakfast with bacon, toast, and scrambled eggs. I watch the morning news on TV while my dad gets ready for work. It's always the same. The body of Todd McDaniel Crawford, age 10, was discovered early this morning. I smile. I don't need to hear the rest. I just finish my eggs, kiss my mom in the cheek, and walk up the street to wait for the bus. I'll wait for a few weeks. I always do. Then I'll see some kid, a year or two younger than me. Maybe at the local park, bragging to his friends about how he's not scared of nothing. I'll walk up to them, hands in my pockets, and I'll say, "Hey, you guys want to know something cool?" They'll say yes. They always do. I'm an older kid after all. You know that old shack out there in the woods over there? I ask. They say a kid died out there.